advised, suspect is armed and considered extremely dangerous.
Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio host, and nationally recognized safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Join us each week as we discuss the best and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.
Hey everybody, it is your good friend Dr. David P. Perrodin from down here in the historic North Star Recording Studio, wishing you well on this November 21st, 2025. So I'm a little more formal today, and I'm going to be focusing this show on data centers, or data centers. I'll just say data centers. Around me, within an hour's drive, there are at least 4 data centers, either currently where they've broken ground or the proposals have been made to have communities accept these data centers. So I put together some notes on this because I think this is very odd. The proliferation of data centers across the United States seems like it's impacting, every state, small communities. And the question, I guess if we get into face validity, like back there on the velocity of information, the face validity question is, does this make sense? And I'm going to go through some questions I put together about this, and I'm going to answer them from a face validity standpoint. So, all right. Hey, look at it is Cameron. So welcome, Cameron. Yeah. So data centers, thousands now in the United States, and proposals for thousands more data centers. What is a data center? Don't really have a good definition. It's not like we have the plastics industry or big tobacco or something that kind of unified a stance and gave a position on, making life better through chemicals, or something like that. So I'm going to identify why I think the lack of messaging is also a very concerning face validity question. And kind of some, what I would say, low-hanging fruit that people in the data center industry, right? I mean, in these billions of dollars, data centers, why they're not going through the steps that we would expect them to go through, from kind of government approval to getting public input, and then even messaging, like how they're messaging what is going to be happening, how this data center would benefit the community. And some of these things I think are really very easy and straightforward to do. And the fact that they're not being done has kind of piqued my, again, face validity. So before we get any further into this, face validity is a term that I detailed in my book back there, The Velocity of Information, Human Thinking During Chaotic Times. So if you haven't read that book, I encourage you to check it out. It's, probably obtainable from your local library. If not, you can find it on, Amazon and places that sell books. The audio version is also excellent. The audiobook narrated by actor Ben Hawk. It's 6 hours and 40 minutes. Ben does an amazing job. The book features 10 interviews. So even though it's nonfiction and has a lot of images and citations, and, if you do consume it via the audiobook, it is really an intellectual, stimulating experience. So, and it's not that much. Audiobooks are kind of a weird animal because as the author, I own the rights to the audiobooks. But you can indicate a price that you want it to sell at. And I try to put both of my books, The Velocity of Information, School of Errors, at a very affordable price point. And the retailers, because it gets out through the network, they put their own price on it. So if you're like, well, Doc, you said it was like $15. Well, maybe it's $15 on Spotify. It might be like $19 on Audible, and there's other places you might find it for like $9 or something like that. So kind of do your homework. I wish I could kind of give you more information, but it is kind of one of those quirks of being an author and having your work out there in the audiobook format. But anyway, for under $20, it's a great listen, and you'll always have it, right? So on that long drive, or when you're cleaning the garage or basting the turkey, whatever is coming up. So let's get into data centers. So around me, data centers are going in and into small communities. When I say small, 10 to 15,000 people. And these data centers are in the range of like $8 to $20 billion. And they're usually like a starting point. They've acquired a lot of land, like maybe 2,000 acres. And they'll say like, this is the initial investment, and then next year we're going to add more. So just to kind of get this in perspective, in Wisconsin, where I live, where I'm broadcasting right now down here in the historic North Star recording studio, last year in the state of Wisconsin, for residential and commercial construction, the total amount of money spent was $125 billion. So it's every house, right? It's every factory, everything that was built last year, $125 billion. That same amount, $125 billion, is the amount that is going to be spent on data centers in our state next year. So substantial, right? I mean, that's wow. And then there's also this point that's coming out of the data centers will consume all of the current level of energy, electricity, right, that's being used in the state, at least one time that amount. So it's like you'd have to double your production of energy to bring these things online. And it could be more than that. It could be, more than what everybody else, what every house in Wisconsin, every business, every school, every street light, right? That amount of energy is going to be needed for these data centers. And no one's answered kind of that question of how do we make that work? Because while these data centers are coming on at a breakneck pace, what isn't happening is the same infrastructure for electrical production, and then also the grid system and so forth. So let's start out with a few terms here. So one is face validity. So face validity is just if looking at something and asking yourself, does this make sense? It's a term that comes out of research. And, if your findings are just really off the wall, you have to look at it and say, something is wrong. There was something got multiplied wrong. Some way that the mixtures were put together, whatever, like this is just off the wall. And so you have to just look at that and say, this doesn't make sense. Face validity check. Sounds easy to do, but a lot of us, we don't do it, and we're just kind of conditioned not to do it, right? You're just conditioned to follow the rules, follow the government, the officials, the adults, whatever. So if you need an example for that, go back and relive the year 2020. So, but here's an example of face validity that I'd like to share. I think it really puts it into a context that you can explain to anybody, and they'll be like, okay, now I understand what face validity is. So face validity is, imagine that you are outside. So I don't have to imagine it because this will be my reality in a month, but you're outside and it's snowing, right? And you're just shaking and you're shivering and you're super cold. So Vanessa, this might be up by you, like the weather, it gets super cold. So face validity. And you're outside and again, it's snowing and you're shivering and you're like, oh, and there's a thermometer on, like a wooden post, right? So you look at this thermometer, this big thing, and it says 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're like, huh. So right off the bat, that doesn't make sense, right? From a face validity standpoint, you're out there, it's snowing, you're shivering, and this says 80 degrees. So a couple things are at play. One, either the thermometer is broken, right? It's obviously stuck at 80. Something's wrong with it. It's not measuring correctly. Because if it was, right, it would be down to like 25 degrees. So that's one option. But there's another option in play here. And that option could be that you are delusional. Yes. I mean, maybe you're just overwhelmed, you're misinterpreting, and for whatever, you're just like, no, it is, it is reading 80 degrees. And if someone else was standing next to you, we'll get into that in a moment. They'd be like, oh, it doesn't say 80 degrees. It says 18 degrees. Like you're just kind of focusing there on the 8 and whatever, but you're just confused, right? So I think people fall into these two areas. One is, the objective thing, which would be the thermometer is broken. But the other one is that their perception of something is just really off from what it is. So how do you account for that? Well, one of the ways is something called a member check network. And I wrote about this in the Velocity of Information. During the pandemic, and I did this, I got together 5 or 6 friends, and we would check in every week. And we would have a certain set of consistent topics that we would address. So questions like we had like a Google document, but a question was, what are you seeing at your store? Like what is in short supply, and maybe like what is abundant in your grocery stores? What are you seeing with banking? Where I was at, there was a sign put out, sell us your quarters. We have a quarter shortage. I have a picture of it in the Velocity of Information. So kind of interesting because, talk about this with people and they forget that happened. One of, are you being stopped to go to work to show your essential papers? One of our members was in Pittsburgh. He had to show from his employer, right? So, but let's go back to this member check. So member check is basically, let's just say like 5 people. And it's best if they are in different areas of geographic areas, and they can kind of, you check with them of like, hey, what's happening? Again, like shortages on shelves and, whatever. And so this is something that you can really increase the accuracy of your findings and your kind of your consistency by just asking 5 or 6 people that you trust. And you also have to have this point. Let's say member check, with that thermometer, and I'm looking at, and I think it's 80 degrees, and of course it can't be 80 degrees. You need to build a network of people around you who are willing to kind of break into your life and kind of steer you back in the right direction if something is going on. That sounds easy to do, but again, when I was writing the Velocity of Information, I cited some studies that said, that the people closest to you, like your family members, are the least likely to tell you something is wrong. And there were studies, for example, with medical people who had different medical conditions, and it was usually the most honest information that they were getting, I guess outside of their physician, wasn't coming from their family members. It would come from people like one step kind of beyond that, because the family members typically would be very careful of how they would want to approach people and and not upset people. So they would measure their words and their language. So you need somebody, right? A friend, somebody who's going to, and this goes both ways, right? That there's one of your friends, somebody who, you care about, and if they're doing something that is really kind of off the rails, or, some pattern of behavior, like, it seems like you've been going gambling a lot. And it also seems to have been talking a lot about, not having money for the mortgage payment or something like that. So let's talk. Um, so, I think having that both ways, that's really hard, right? I think right now, if any of us stopped and we asked, like, who's the person who would break into our life to save us? It's probably, it would take a while to come up with that. And then also, who would we feel comfortable kind of stepping into that, maybe over that line? You'd have to have this trust with the person ahead of time. And anyway, I talk about this with my school administrators, my aspiring administrators. And I said, one of the most important things you need to do early in your career and then keep cultivating is a member check network of a few people who, if you're off, meaning like you're overwhelmed with, whatever, especially during the pandemic, superintendents getting hammered by parents that wanted schools opened, and then community or county health agencies that wanted schools closed, and then all of this velocity of information, all this different raining down of people's wants and versus like what the data is. And people don't bounce back from that very well. So after they're in these high stress decisions, they start to lose their ability to be objective. I wrote about that in my doctoral dissertation. I had interviewed principals, and one of the questions I had that we went down and transcribed and coded and all of that was high stakes decision making, like you have to suspend a student, there's been a fight, something like that, and then 30 minutes later you have another big situation come up, and then whatever. How do you kind of reset yourself so you're kind of crisp and ready to take in all of the information, make a decision? And what was universal was that people start the year off as administrators putting more time into decisions and kind of thinking it through, and then as the year goes on, because there's more things happening, they get worn down, and so they will kind of pattern things, or they'll just be like, well, that's like a suspension. And I'm not saying that is a fault of an administrator, but I'm saying it's human nature. I also use the example of Robert Travis, the crab boater in Velocity of Information, where he did 2 seasons crab boating in the Bering Sea. And then he said, all 3 of his bosses were killed on the boat. So, crab cages break loose and these wild waves and, killing people. And it's just extremely dangerous. So when you take the job, you have to sign saying, I'm not going to sue you if I'm killed or dismembered or whatever. So, and it was absolutely wild to listen to him talk about that. So, and I don't know where I was going with that. I'll think about it in a little bit. So, but there was a connection there. But anyway, so let's go back on the member checks. You've got people, someone who's you can ask questions. So I did a member check. I reached out to 5 friends across the country, and we talked about data centers, and they all said, yes, they're here. So whether that was Texas or it was Pittsburgh, it was Florida, California, every single person. And that was unusual for the member check to have that level of continuity. And a lot of things were extremely similar. One, they're not making media releases of like, here's what we're doing with the data center. The second one is there was money being given up front to the communities. It's kind of a goodwill. They were targeting smaller communities. Again, that population maybe 10 to 20,000. And I'm not trying to say when targeting I'm not positioning a data center as good or bad. I'm just telling you kind of what was happening. And then also that the media was not covering this to the level that it would warrant, right? So, if you're a community of 10,000 people and a $10 billion data center comes in, it gives you several $1 million up front as a goodwill gesture. And suddenly you can replace every fire truck and you can pave every road. And, as a city, kind of all of your woes are gone, at least for a while, right? you would think, and that level of investment, I mean, like, for example, like a brand new NFL football stadium is maybe $3 billion. And here you're talking about something that's, double or three times the price of that on initial investment. So it's just massive. And it's not being covered by the media. And when it is covered by the media, it's because there's been so many people asking questions about it or going to meetings or probably pestering the local media. They have to have some. If the media completely ignores that, they lose the credibility with the local communities. So they'll cover it. They'll interview some people, and they might reach out to the company, and then there'll be the statement. It's putting in the data center, and there'll be a thing where there might be a statement, or there'll be like nothing. We didn't hear anything back from the company, and the media will just say like, people are asking questions, but they'll leave it at that, right? They won't dig further of trying to like go to government officials or like look at zoning laws or stuff like, because the media doesn't want to dig into something, because like this data center and this influx of money benefits them too, right? So they're not going to rock the boat. But let's get into some questions here about data centers. And as we go along, please feel free to post in the chat. So here we go. The first one is approval for data centers. So we've probably all heard of examples where something couldn't be built because there was an environmental study and it found that there was a endangered species that lived in this area, right? And I'm not trying to make light of that, right? But say, an endangered frog or something like that. So this area is like off limits. You can't build, or if you are going to build here, then you have to have this plan in place to preserve X amount of land for this, this species, and then also zoning, like how much water, how much utilities are you going to use, how much traffic is there going to be, what's the sound level going to be, all of those things come into play through typical like building permits, and usually these larger scale projects. So like example of Buc-ee's, so you're probably familiar with the Buc-ee's, the large gas station that has everything else, like brisket sandwiches and stuff like that. So they are putting one now in Wisconsin, maybe two, but that was a big deal. Like when it came in, it was on the news. People were for and against it, and it was a long, drawn out process from when it was first announced to when it actually happened. It was probably at least a year, maybe a year and a half. That's a Buc-ee's, right? So it's it's a gas station, and plus, I guess like if I would look at what I could find about Buc-ee's and what people told me about Buc-ee's, are like, yeah, it's pretty awesome. Gas station wise, right? The things, the different foods that they have, and they really focus on the experience of kind of having unusual items and very clean and crisp, and so anyway, so this data center timeline from a face validity standpoint, data center will buy land, and then they will make a proposal to the municipality, and they'll say, here's what we intend to do. Like, let's say we bought 2,000 acres and we're going to develop 700 of those off the bat for a data center. So they'll give information, but it'll also say, we can't tell you who our clients are who are using this. It's non-disclosure agreement. And so they give them the information, and they'll say, you have 30 or 60 days to make your decision. Okay. But the part is that, again, from what I've been gathering through my own research and through member checks, and talking with people who have had, again, this is happening close by, right? The proposals are non-negotiable, right? It's not that the municipality then can counter back and say, well, we need more time, or you need to answer this question, or how about this? We know that you're very close to whatever. like this water well or like this residential area, and we're concerned about noise studies and stuff. That doesn't happen. So public input and environmental oversight are basically bypassed, which is very strange, because that's not how things happen in at least my area and my member check areas, right? Like I gave the example of the Buc-ee's coming in down the road. Something that, I guess as benign as a very large gas station. I know Buc-ee's is more than that, but I'm just putting it in a irrelatable term, right? Drew all this debate, right? Yet you have, for whatever that investment is, which I don't know, but I know it's not $8 or $10 billion. You have this data center coming in. And so let's go back. Approval happens at a breakneck speed. You do not have the deep environmental reviews. You don't have the municipalities opening up public discussion for this. Now they might say, yeah, we had, well, after people have been pestering them or show up, but it's not a two-way street, right? People will ask questions and there'll be vague answers, and then the older people will vote yes for it and they'll just move on. The news isn't digging into this at all. Environmentalists, right? Environmental groups, like just all of the laws, all the regulations, just seems like it doesn't apply. So from a face validity question, just remember face validity, the question would be, why the rush? So, why does this why do you need to start this in 60 days? Like put a shovel in the ground, when, normally we would have a chance for input to get to know you more. You're bringing the biggest thing that's ever happened, not only in our community, but in our county, maybe like in a multi-county area. So what's the rush? The face validity. So whenever someone is trying to, sell you something or get you on board, and it seems like it's too good to be true, like, here, we're going to build this. You're not going to have to increase your schools because it's not really creating jobs outside of construction. We're going to give you money up front. You'll get money on taxes. Again, every fire truck you can replace, buy brand new, whatever you want. Your streets, you can get them paved, and you're going to be an easy street for a while. Municipality. And if it seems too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true, right? So face validity is that this is happening too fast without the input that we would typically see in large projects, and very scant media coverage. Let's also talk now about money flow. So when communities are aware that a large business, right, there might be a large investment in the community, they do something called a tax incremental district, or they basically give tax breaks on the land for a certain number of years to encourage people to come in and build. Or they'll say, in addition to that, we will put out the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, the roads, all of that, and we'll, prepare the land. And so the municipalities will typically try to lure these companies in because they want them for the tax base and then for the jobs. Although data centers, like, again, we only have kind of the construction jobs. We don't really have a large number of jobs that would be ongoing with that, people working there. So that, and municipalities know they're competing against other municipalities. And it's the same thing with data centers. Like if you don't accept a data center's proposal, the response is the town over will, so we'll go to that town, and then you'll get to go over there on the 4th of July and see their 5, brand new fire trucks and their $3 million ladder truck. And they'll be driving down the freshly paved, new road, and you'll see their new shiny street lamps and just all of the cool stuff in their municipal center. So, but that's not what happens with data centers. Data centers just kind of pick your community, pick the area, and then there's a lot of goodwill money, quote unquote goodwill money, that's offered up front. And in an area within about 45 minutes of me, it was $50 million that was upfront to the municipality. And then also saying, don't worry about getting the sewer lines out there and paving the roads. We'll take care of all of that. Like, don't worry about that. We don't need the tax incremental district. Like, you don't need to give us a tax break for the first 5 years. Although municipalities typically do that because they want to lock in these deals like as fast as they can. So again, municipalities will almost always try to lure with incentives, big investments into the community. But in this case, the data centers are putting that money already up front to the community. And it's very unusual that that is happening. So again, imagine data center comes in and says, here, as a good gesture, right, we're giving you X amount of money right up front. You can spend any way you want, put it in your coffers, and then you'll have tax revenue, which will come off of this. So the face validity question with that is, why pay to be here unless there's something urgent or hidden driving it? So if you're willing, because really the data center could negotiate all of those things with these municipalities and likely get them, right? The tax incremental, district, and so they're not paying as much taxes or any taxes at all for a number of years, get the utilities and roads and all that built out at the taxpayer expense. So this is strange. So if they did that, right, that would take up more time, and it seems like they're racing time. So from a face validity question, like, why are they giving this money up front? In the sense of why is this so urgent? Why does this have to happen right now? To the fact that, you are, as a business, you are foregoing millions of dollars in savings, right, that you'd be paying in taxes and developing the area where this is going in order to get it built. So let's go to the next one. The scale makes no technological sense. So the scale makes no technological sense. If we go back to the 1950s, a computer would be in a warehouse. It would be so big that, that was early computing, right? And this equipment that would be, just tons of equipment. And now our phones are several times more powerful than those warehouses of computers. So if you're looking at the progression of technology, right, it's obvious that things will just get smaller, anything computer-based, right? It's just going to get smaller and faster. And that doubles every year, and it just accelerates, right? So there will be a point in the not too distant future, when I'm going to use this clip here, there'll be a computer chip that'll be the size of this clip that will do probably everything that a data center can do. And maybe that's 10 years from now, maybe it's 20 years from now, but it will happen. So you're seeing these massive, multi-billion-dollar, several-acre campuses being built that are just going to be obsolete in a short amount of time. And they're going to be difficult to repurpose. And that's another thing no one is asking. What do we do with this when it's no longer a data center? How is it made? Is it being designed up front to be converted into housing or cold storage or whatever? What do you do with this thing when it's no longer a data center? So that's a question that municipalities should be asking. So again, face validity question. The question that comes out of this, because it doesn't seem to make sense. Again, the scale of building these massive isolated data centers, over 30 acres and more. Why invest in massive footprints when computing power keeps condensing? Again, it seems like a really bad long-term investment. When I say long-term, 10 years, it seems like it would be, you're putting all these billions in, that would all be obsolete. So there's this question of what are you trying to do here? because again, in this specific area, like computing and computer chips and technology, that will get smaller. You know, if you're building something which is a 30-acre construction place that's building houses, like houses will always have a certain size and footprint, right? And you'll need whatever. Or if you're making concrete or things like that, or steel, right? I mean, you're not going to make a steel plant that's going to be the size of a one-car garage next to a house. But for computing and computing power, the natural trajectory just points to like these things are all going to be obsolete in a very short amount of time. And then, what do you do with it? So from a face validity question, it seems like a really bad investment because these, again, billions of dollars, and probably in 10 years will be obsolete. So let's go to our next one. No one can explain what these centers actually do. So that is a weird area for me to wrap my head around. What does a data center do? And so who are its clients? What data do they possess? But what is a data center? Well, it makes the internet go faster, and it makes it runs all kinds of formulas to try to figure out scientific things that we struggle with and whatever. And I'm guessing, I don't know, I really haven't heard a good narrative on that. Like there isn't there aren't talking points of what a data center does. And if someone tells you, well, it's used for AI and it's used for like for videos and stuff like that, you could pause it and say, but we have that now, right? Like I'm broadcasting to you from my basement in a studio, and I have a microphone, and StreamYard is really advanced. It's stuff and things like that, and so like this exists, and it is only getting more efficient, right? This costs me less than $100 a year to have this subscription and to do as many shows and broadcasts. It doesn't cost me anything to have it out on YouTube. So this already exists, right? So logically, you could think, well, maybe regionally there could be larger centers to process these things, but do we need 1,000 of them in a state? So the other thing, so what do these things do? So I wrote about in World War II, there was the Committee for National Morale. And in 1942, in their purpose, so they were brought together by the president and by the Congress at that time to message to the American public why it was important to participate in World War II, right? So it was called the Road to Victory, and it was a campaign where they had these murals at the New York Museum of Art. And they would show people working in victory gardens, right? So it's all relatable, and people working in fields and doing just other things, and basically like what you needed to do to support the war effort, and then also what you were preserving, because if we lost the war, like these things would be gone. And then they had it travel the country, these murals, and it was very specifically studied about how much space there was between each mural, so you would have time to soak in what was on one before you got to the other. Again, I wrote about it in detail in the Philosophy of Information. And then the newspapers got images of these murals, and they were putting them in the newspapers, right? So they're building up this united message, which is coming out to the American people, and then also the Allies. So they were getting these images and things too. And that was just one part of the Committee for National Morale, but anyways, the propaganda, it's messaging. So, and we know those types of things are done, right? JFK, and let's put a man on the moon by the end of the 60s, and the science race and things like that. So that's not unusual for any of us to experience that, but the messaging is way off with data centers, right? So we don't have any statement from data centers about how they benefit us, right? And that seems odd because they are certainly taking a lot of flack right now from the public. And their position has just been to be very quiet, either as an individual data center, whatever organization, company, government, hedge fund is paying for them. Um, but they aren't putting statements out there. And here's a statement I came up with. And I think any data center or like collectively, data centers could have some organization, right, that they, some marketing firm that they work with to put a few statements out there to kind of influence public sentiment. But here's a statement I came up with, and I think it would be accurate. I don't think it would be completely what data centers are doing, but I don't think like it could be a statement that could be challenged and found false. So imagine the data centers coming into your town. Some people are very opposed to it. Some people are for it, but the data center then releases a statement, and here's what they say. Data centers power research that helps us understand biology, detect diseases earlier, develop treatments, and discover cures. This work directly benefits you and the people you love. So that's it. 2 sentences. Let me read it again. And this time, think about it and maybe post a comment. Let me know if this would influence you, how you'd feel about it. So again, this would be the only thing that they would say. But here we go. Data centers power research that helps us understand biology, detect diseases earlier, develop treatments, and discover cures. This work directly benefits you and the people you love. So I came up with that. So if I were to hear that statement, I'd be like, okay. I mean, trying to figure out using all this computing power. I know that's not all that's going on, right? But if they're trying to find cures for diseases, be able to identify diseases earlier, things that benefit me, and maybe I know somebody that has a certain disease, MS or cancer, and it's like, whoa, or maybe you've had that, and you're thinking, yeah, I mean, let's move this forward. Let's try to understand more about this. So my quality of life personally can be improve my health. By possibly the findings coming out of what this data, what the computing power would be able to do. I think that's really powerful, and I've been just amazed that a statement like that hasn't come out from either a data center or a marketing firm that would be hired by a data center or multiple data centers to kind of like put some propaganda out there. Again, I'm not saying propaganda in a negative way. I'm just saying so the other part is, let's say they put that statement out there and you would immediately have people in the community who would get behind the data center. So, let's say 100% of the community, once that statement is out there, maybe like 25% of people are like, okay, like this is important stuff. I know somebody who has, some chronic diseases. And if this data center or like data centers in general are going to lead to some way to alleviate or remedy that, that is awesome. Or like, I want a better world for my kids or my grandkids where, disease is managed or prevented or whatever. And if this is contributing to it. So you're going to have that. You'll still have your 25% of people opposed, but then you have these 50% people in the middle. But because you have these 25% of people who will be like sold on this statement, they will kind of defend the data center. So, let's say you're for this and then your neighbor is opposed to it. And you're like, this is, I don't know what it's going to do with our water supply. Our wells already go down pretty far. And if they start taking water, it's going to cost us a lot to drill. What if we can't get water? And then the person's for the data center because this statement's come out, they'll be like, that's the price we have to pay, and do not stand in the way of progress of this because it's going to impact not only people right now, but people forever, right? With health benefits. So I look at this, and again, no one can explain what data centers do, and data centers are doing a very odd maneuver with messaging, meaning that they've basically gone quiet. Like, you don't also get a tour of a data center. And if you find one online, it is very controlled. It is a very small portion. And I'm sure that any video that does work its way out has been scrutinized by the data center. So, so there's nothing that's going to, really be of value. I mean, people know what server farms look like and stuff like that. So, but the messaging seems really off. So I think that is another thing from Face Validity is, why aren't they hiring? What's the deal with the secrecy on what's going on? And it's just not normal for infrastructure that is this big, right? It's off. And why is it off? And if anything too, like, why can't you just spin it in a way that puts you in a positive position, then just leave it at that? So let's go on to our next one. Energy demands are impossible to meet. So, I remember the time of incandescent light bulbs. Most of us do. And they threw off a lot of heat and took a lot of energy. Your electrical bill was up. I have my Christmas decorations out now. Those tiny lights, but they're not LEDs. They're still the old styles. So, like, we'll have higher bills here for the next 2 months. But so, we all went through the banning of incandescent light bulbs, and we had the little swirly bulbs, the fluorescent bulbs, and we were told, oh, those will last like 10 years, and they would last, like a couple months. They burn out. And then LED bulbs, we all got switched over to that because they'll take less energy and they'll last longer. And apparently, it's a better light spectrum and stuff like that. And I mean, now, like, LED lights are probably all of those things, but the thought of, we're doing these things to save energy is pretty ridiculous when we have all of these massive structures being built, which will consume magnitudes of all of this energy. So the energy you're saving is just a small fraction, right? It's not even worth the effort kind of when you're having data centers coming, which are going to use like the same amount of power that the entire state already uses. So, the energy demands are impossible to meet from a face validity standpoint. Like, where's the energy coming from? Because we're not creating new power plants. You have to also create the lines, eminent domain, to get these lines down. How long does that take? How much does that cost? How will the priorities be ranked? Meaning, like, when it's summer and everyone has their air conditioner on, rolling blackouts, will the data centers stay on? And then the residences and businesses will have 4 hours a day without power. I mean, really weird. So this whole thing of like bringing on these massive energy consumers of data centers doesn't make sense when we're talking about, we're going to evolve to electric vehicles. We're going to, put in LED lights and all these things to save energy. And now we have, boom, all this energy going out the door into these centers. I also kind of think like the whole Bitcoin mining and these Bitcoin warehouses are the same thing. I mean, it kind of a similar thought, consuming all of this energy, creating all of this heat. And then for what? Like for a currency, you're not manufacturing a tangible product. But so the energy demands are impossible to meet. Face validity, where does the electricity come from? And it has to come from somewhere fast, because again, these things will be online in the next 24 to 48 months. And we know, like, if you're going to put up a nuclear power plant, it's so rare now in the United States to do nuclear power. Like, it would take you 5 to 10 years if you had that proposal going today to get through all of the stages before the final approval would be out there and construction would start. Data centers. So another face validity question is, they are scattered, they're not centralized. So why is it necessary to have in a state, let's say 500 data centers, and some states have like 1,000, but let's say, why is it necessary to have 500 data centers in a state versus buying a large area? Because you don't have a workforce. Once it's built, you don't have 500 or 1,000 people like working there. Your workforce will be pretty small. So the argument would be, well, if we had a big, massive campus, it would be hard to get enough housing and stuff, to make that viable. Although like that doesn't hold up because look at, Silicon Valley and stuff like that. But anyway, so like why do you have 500 data centers, billions of dollars of data centers peppered across the state, mostly in small communities? Why not centralize them? Take some land that's in, I guess, if you're going to do a colder climate, Wyoming, North Dakota, something like that. So you have the natural advantage in winter, right, of heat, of being able to dissipate heat easier. And land, Wyoming isn't very populous, right? So why not build something there? Why not take, 30,000 acres and create this massive complex and have it all centralized, right? Like, so questions come up. Face validity, it doesn't make sense to replicate all of these. Think about like if you had a factory where you're making cars, like Henry Ford. I mean, so you have your plant like initially in Dearborn, and then you create a couple plants, but you don't create 500 car plants in Michigan, right? Because you'd splinter it out too much. It wouldn't make any sense. It makes more sense to have it all centralized and have your technicians there and have, one building or one campus. Your security, your everything would just be there. So, very very strange. So, an answer to this could be, and again, I'm just speculating, right? Because they're in the void of information, people will create their own ideas of why something is happening. But is there a scenario where these need to be independent? Because if they generate a certain level of intelligence within the data center, that they don't want it to spread to the other data centers and maybe like take over. I'm not saying necessarily like a Terminator thing, but let's say, or if one became infected with a virus or whatever, that you'd physically be able to isolate the structure, right? Now I'll say that and people say, that's crazy. And maybe it is crazy, but we don't have a narrative to counter that. We don't have a narrative from data centers and also explaining like why they have to put so many of these in. When we know that a mass, right, to build it in a large scale would just seem to make more sense for anything that you're manufacturing, right? And the fact, again, as I mentioned, Wyoming and North Dakota and northern Minnesota, like you could find places. Yeah, it's kind of like Walt Disney, going, and he originally flying over the swamps in Florida and saying, I want to put Disney World here, and then buying up this massive amount of land, and it's where Disney World is. And like, so we have, across the world, what, Disney World, Disneyland, Disney Paris. And so like what, maybe 5-6 large Disney parks. Florida does not have 500 Disneylands, right? So the whole fact that these things are scattered is very odd. And I guess you could say, well, they can all work together over the internet and collaborate, but I don't know that. And no one has said that. But it doesn't seem like that is really what's happening. Like, it seems like these are very isolated structures, kind of meant to be autonomous. So why? Like, why do that? So face validity question is, what's up with their strategic isolation? Because that doesn't seem to make sense. It seems like it would just be more affordable to put it in one center. So Vanessa's asking a question about water reservoirs. So, which is a good question. Very good. And that is happening, but we're seeing them, for example, in Wisconsin, we see some like in Port Washington, which is next to Lake Michigan. So you can see the water source, but other ones that are going up in places that do not have an obvious water source. I mean, there's probably an aquifer and stuff underneath, and they talk about closed loop technology. But I looked into that, Vanessa, and there are a number of data centers going in areas that are not like on a big lake or a very large water supply. So what you're talking about comes up to, what about like the UP in Michigan, or again, northern Minnesota, north of Duluth, where you're still close to like Lake Superior? Like, why not acquire land in these areas where you would have access to a large amount of water? That is happening, but it's not the absolute profile on data centers. They're going in places that, again, aren't near lakes and rivers too. So Vanessa brings up a point. See, Vanessa, you are, you're very observant and intelligent, and representing like the question or the point you just made. The underground aquifers will be depleted. So that question should be a question that has to be answered in a public forum by data centers when they come into a community, of what does this mean for our water supply, and then also have not just the data center. I mean, because they can tell you whatever they want to tell you, but then also that the government and that their Sierra Club or whatever, that you have some groups with vested interests from different positions to kind of get objective on this. So, but what happens? And then there was a community where a data center went in, and their aquifers were being depleted. And I'm not saying it was causal, although the people in the community who were affected believe it is 100% causal, that they're having to go down deeper with wells, and it's very expensive, and the quality of water isn't as good. So Vanessa's hitting on the face validity questions that will ripple across communities, and people aren't having the opportunity to ask these critical questions. And again, they're not hard to uncover. It's just we're not thinking about these because it's just moving along quietly. So I want to welcome our good friend Bolo from Canada. He's saying the AI race will affect global power. Data centers are necessary to compute. We need to win. Losing will be bad. I'm going to get to that in a little bit, buddy. But I think we are kind of aligned on that conclusion. So right. So just from the show, we have a feeling from, if you're listening and if you're posting, you have a vibe. The face validity, you're detecting it. You're asking the right questions, and you're seeing this, right? So let's go to the next one. We don't have many left here, but the motive doesn't match the narrative. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but we already have cloud computing. We already have AI. We already have social media, the YouTube servers that are for this video. Why do we have to suddenly build massive amounts of these things? Again, in my state, last year, $125 billion of construction, residential and commercial. That's how much will happen next year just for data centers in the state. So wouldn't it make more sense to get better at networking existing systems to capitalize on all of the computing power that's out there, right? There used to be this thing, I don't know if you remember it, back about 15, 20 years ago. I think it was a NASA program where you could enroll your computer to help analyze like data coming in from the telescopes that were analyzing space. So they would farm little bits out to you, and then like your computer would do it and send it. You never knew really what was going on, but there was this way that it was capitalizing on people's home computers to help NASA. And that was kind of a novel thing. It might have even been like longer than that. It might have been like 25 years ago. But so yeah, so you're basically telling us we're going to bring you things that you already have. And we have to do these massive investments, these massive construction things in order to do that. So I don't know. That doesn't seem to make sense. So face validity, this is where Bolo was talking about with, again, I'll bring it up again. saying the AI race will affect global power. Data centers are necessary to compute. We need to win. I think compete is probably what you meant, but they're actually computing, so it's all right. Losing will be bad. So the motive doesn't match the narrative. Face validity, I'm saying the real incentive for this, how these things are going in from buying land to breaking ground in 60 days, no public hearing, no environmental protection agency, stepping in and let's see what the impact is. Nothing like that, right? So the real incentive seems to be military or government contracts, maybe some multi-government arrangements, multi-jurisdictional, of trying to get the lead in the AI race or try to win the AI race. And this reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you're familiar with Bob Lazar. So Bob Lazar claimed that he worked at Area 51. I think this was in the 1980s. He went on TV in Las Vegas and claimed he worked at Area 51, and his job was to reverse engineer alien or exotic technology, propulsion systems, and to this day he still holds to his story. It's been consistent, and he still talks about what he experienced at Area 51. Again, you can look up Bob Lazar and watch the interviews directly with him. But, we start to have questions. So 100 years ago, 1925, 50% of the United States did not have electricity. 1925. So most of that was in farmland, out in the country, and we were still a largely agrarian society at that time. But think about it, 100 years ago, drop in the bucket on a timeline, 50% of the country didn't have electricity. So, we go then from kind of World War II, right around when they say like the Roswell crash, right, the 40s. And then between that time and now, we've had this massive proliferation in technology. Let me give you a few examples. Things that in the last like 50 years, we have integrated circuits, fiber optics, night vision, lasers, memory metals, things you can form and then you bend them all up and then they reform into what they were. So just 5 examples of things that we suddenly have, which doesn't seem like we were on a trajectory to achieve those things like this rapidly. So you'll hear some people say that the government acquired this exotic technology or information, worked with the private sector, Bell Labs, these companies, and gave them, protections and invested in their stock and basically said, reverse engineer this or else find a way to like make it applications for science or military or whatever. So things we'll never know about, right? We will never know those. They'll never be for public consumption. But I do believe there is a small amount of people, or it is completely, the United States competing against other governments. But it's interesting because Bolo, like some of the data centers are owned, like the centers, and they're leased out, but they're owned by other countries. One is Canada, by the way. So that is also kind of a weird hitch in this. So you wonder if it's like allied by, North America versus like Europe and China, and I don't know, but it does seem like there's a race going on, right? So the motive doesn't match the narrative. It seems like there is a race. So is it a military race to get a computer or kind of a network, right? Chips, whatever, where you can basically break every password in a fraction of a second. Every type of password, anything that would be facial recognition, whatever, like it would just have the computing power, boom, to do that. Or to be able to shut down any other country's electrical grid, internet, all of that stuff, whatever it is. I don't know. But I think there's a very viable argument to be made, and it all has to be speculation, that this is a massive military race that is going on. And these are all kind of military subcontracts. And that's why it would seem like there would be multiple campuses kind of competing against each other. So what if there was, and none of us knew this, but what if there was this meeting with these investors and then also these companies, right? A very high level meeting, very secure, and say the first one who can achieve this outcome with your data center, right? That you can do this, you'll get $5 trillion, right? We'll pay you $5 trillion if you can do X, right? So maybe that's why these are competing, and they're not all owned by the same people. We don't know who's inside, and it's not like they're all one company. It's just spread out. But so, and maybe they're trialing things in different ways, right? They're trying to get to different outcomes by, like, this data center is going to use this approach of serial computing, and this one's going to use like some different cloud computing. I don't know enough about this, but like maybe that's going on. But I think you're right. You're on point with it. There's something much bigger driving this. And let's say hypothetically that you had a reward, an incentive you're working toward, and it was something crazy, again, like $5 trillion, right? That if you could do this, like, you would get all this power and all of this wealth and everything, and just exemptions from any oversight and just immunity from anything that might be negative coming out of this. It'd be kind of like a modern Manhattan Project, right? So that would also explain why companies are willing to drop 10, 20, 30 billion dollars into this. Maybe that's just being backfilled by the government, right? Like, it's being brought back to the company, or maybe it's through like some hedge funds and stuff like that. I mean, all it's, but that's an argument to explain what is happening. And of course, people will say, well, that's really out there, David. And it is really out there. But we don't have a different narrative that is happening right now to even counter that. So let's see. So Bolo is saying, I heard the water case was debunked, air in the data. So I don't know. I don't know, again, how much water is used. I don't know. And what is a closed loop system? What is used in the water? Like, if there's a coolant, like in a radiator, right? What is that? Does it have an environmental impact? But it does seem like there needs to be a substantial amount of cooling capacity in this to draw the heat out. And we saw that in like Bitcoin farms. So this is Vanessa Kitty saying the AI race will make world governments have greater control of every aspect of our lives. Yes. And it will centralize power. And I've been thinking too, like, well, what if the US, I guess, wins this? What if they come up in 33 months with this absolute supercomputer that achieves all of its objectives that they had for it? What does it mean for us as a country? What does it mean for the other countries? Do we instantly become where the other countries basically have to bow down to the US? What is the end game? But we know that people want power, and just look at Congress, right? I mean, you get voted to Congress, and how many times we hear, like, this person was in Congress 2 years, and they make $200,000 a year, but through stock trading they made $10 million a year. So there are people who just want power, and they'll do anything for power, and governments will do anything for power. And the other thing is too, like the United States being $38 trillion in debt, this could be your way to harness and kind of leverage and make you untouchable. No one's going to call in the debt when you are absolutely, completely powerful over everybody. So let's go down. I think just one more point here. Just reinforcing, what are we trying to accomplish with data centers? I think it's a fair question to ask because they're being built in our communities. It's not being built on a military base. It's not being designated like an Area 51 or a certain area. I mean, even if the government said that, if they came out and said, we are working on very sophisticated projects, which we're not going to discuss with American people. But we need to do this for national defense, and we are doing this piece of this area of land. It's going to be a no-fly area. You're not going to be able to go over there. People would be like, okay, I mean, I guess you got to do what you got to do, right? I don't think it would be like this big opposition thing. That's part of this too, is like where some transparency on this, even if it is again a spin where it's not accurate at all, but some statement, like most people will just go with it. Like if you give people a reason, I wrote about it in the Velocity of Information. If you tell people ahead of time something bad is going to happen, so you brace them. There's messaging. They say, for example, if a doctor comes in and has to tell you really bad news, the first thing you're going to say is, I have very bad news for you. And then they'll pause. And now you've just braced yourself to receive this bad news. You've shifted into this mode. And then they go through that and say, whatever. But even if you told people, we're going to do this, and it is going to mean there'll be times when we're going to have rolling blackouts because this is for the greater good of our country. And it's kind of like that Museum of Modern Art where they had, the victory gardens, and you've got to make the sacrifices during, you had your little tokens that you'd redeem for so much sugar and meat during World War II. Gasoline, had to go to the troops that wasn't going in your gas tank, 1944. So if they did that, I think most people would accept the narrative today. So it's weird to me that they haven't done that. Again, go into big data center like as a group, or even a government statement in support of the data centers and kind of what they're doing. Like, so this is weird because there's not even an attempt to give us a plausible narrative, right? Or an incomplete narrative. Because I just think it shuts down it turns down the temperature on all of this significantly. And I'm not saying they could completely tell you something that is inaccurate or just like a small part of the pie. Again, if they're just telling you, well, this is for the advancements of medical, whatever, and it's also, for very sophisticated military applications to keep us, secure, then, again, and they don't have to take it any further. They don't have to keep justifying whatever. They just put a statement out there. Most people will be like, okay, I get it, and it's weird, right? It's really weird that something like that hasn't come out there. So, Bolo's saying free hot water. Yeah. That's kind of an interesting thing of if you had the research, the scientific community, would there be a viable use for the heat that exits these data centers or the hot water, right? Could you then flip that to power turbines to create some lower level of electricity, right? So like, during the process, you're converting electricity to heat, but then could you also take some of that heat and convert it back to electricity? So, I mean, just interesting questions, right? That no one's talking about. So Vanessa's saying corporations create corporations. So how do you actually own them? Yeah. We go back into Walt Disney, right? Created a number of corporations to buy land in the Orlando area because he knew that if it was just Disney coming in, people would hold out for like a lot of money. But if it was like smaller corporations that he owned and he was kind of fuzzing over the clear ownership of those, people are more likely to sell. That's the thing with data centers is no one really knows who they're owned by. Meaning, like, is it a hedge fund? Do they get government money? And then they don't know who their clients are. Like, who you're selling this space in your warehouse to who? What company? Is it Oracle? Is it Meta? Whatever, Texas Instruments, who knows? The government. And I get some of that, right? Because we do have intellectual property and trade secrets, and no one knows the formula for making Coca-Cola and stuff. I get some of that. But again, there just seems to be this massive lack of a public relations campaign. Which again, if you're spending $8 to $10 billion on one data center, you could hire, and you're giving millions to the community, right, as upfront goodwill. Well, $1 million into an ad firm, and you're working with a team of 5 people, and say, pitch us some ways to message this. So, it's like in the, what was it, the 60s when tobacco, or the 70s needed the sticker saying is smoking cigarettes can cause cancer, and then the marketing teams had to figure out how to kind of work around that so cigarettes could still be sold. And then they would say things like, well, our cigarettes are toasted, so the new market is, these cigarettes are toasted, our competitors aren't. You still the label, but now you're taking a different angle on it. So let me go and catch up, because there's been some really fascinating posts here in the chat. So again, Vanessa's saying, the research has shown as the models scale up dramatically, the comprehension of the system increases. Excellent. We do not need dictators taking over everywhere. Yeah. And then we cross-reference these into questions that would be related to data centers. And these are all very good. Vanessa is saying they're trying to use this AI in a great many projects all at once. Yeah. So medical, military, space, right? So the applications are very broad, and we don't know that. We can't, there isn't like a datacenter.gov of here's like what the government knows about data center, like what they would put as a public facing side of that, and what they're doing, and trying to and keep it broad enough where people aren't going to get information that's very privileged. But yeah, it's really wonky. Let me go down. And Vanessa stated, it is helping us model solutions in mathematics already, and new novel routes to solutions we have yet to think of. This is already happening with current models. Yes. Yeah. So there are great advancements being made in math and science and medical. But tell us more about that, right? Like, showcase it, have a TV special on it. And we don't have that. And that's where I would even, again, for face validity is, why is the industry touting these things? I remember, the campaigns for Teflon, right? What was it, 3M or DuPont, and how Teflon, now, of course, we know now, the issues with Teflon and some of those protective coatings, but I mean, like, how science was making life better, and science, plastics and things like that. And, but we just don't, we're missing this narrative. It's like there isn't even an effort to get us on board. And that is scary, at least in my perception of face validity, because when people don't need to get you on board, it's because they already have all of the consent and all the power they need. They don't even need to waste time with giving you a little tidbit to kind of satisfy you, to kind of keep you busy, to enroll you, or even to confuse you, or just to placate you and say, it's for your benefit. It's for your kids' benefit. You're just, we've got a handle on this. We're not exactly, we're learning as we go, and how we'll apply this, but and then, just point out some things, whatever, how life has already been, quote unquote, enhanced. Like, you have a phone, but on that phone, wherever you're at, you can call someone if you need help, or if there's a storm coming in, you can bring up a weather map. Imagine that 40 years ago, thinking, you'll have a phone in your pocket, and you'll be able to pull this thing out, and you can bring up a live weather radar when there's a storm coming in, and how that benefits you, and being able to get to safety, and also just plan your day and stuff like. I mean, so again, the low-hanging fruit isn't being harvested, and that to me is unnerving, because with this massive investment, how much money would it cost? So I will share this, sometimes with people and say, someone approached me and said, you seem like you could build us a pretty good narrative on this. So we want to hire you. I'd be like, sure. you know, um, and I'm not a professional at this, but why aren't they doing that? What is missing? It's really odd messaging, right? But I go back to that Committee for National Morale, and if we go back to 2020, though, the messaging was really awkward and clunky during the pandemic. I wrote a chapter about messaging. Initially, should have been on getting people as healthy and fit as possible. I cited government studies, right? Government funded studies over years, right? That had said, and we know this, right? If you exercise and you eat healthy, and kind of stay connected, right, with people, you are less likely to become ill. Like, that's an axiom. We know that, right? If you eat well and you get exercise, you're less likely to get ill. By whatever percent, we don't know, but say it's 5%. That'd be significant, right, over a population. So then why wasn't the messaging in the first 3 months of the pandemic about getting fit and getting healthy? Because you're less likely, and if you do get sick, you're more likely to have a positive recovery. So why didn't PBS have videos on like how to do workouts at home? Or why didn't celebrities get together through like a government committee for national morale, like a modern day during 2020, right? And tell celebrities, hey, like, let's do a We Are the World thing. You're all going to be at your own homes, but in 15 days, you have to create a song, and it's basically an exercise song that elderly people could watch in a nursing home and move their hands, and just so you had that where people were connected. And then for other people, you could do a portal where they could log in and do their they could watch lessons about how to cooking healthy, like little short things. And if you got like 10 of those that you watched, it would unlock like a 20% coupon from Amazon or from Nike up to like $100. So you'd have government stimulus happening, right? You'd have people ordering stuff, and the government then would just be backfilling and paying this back to Amazon or Nike and stuff like that. So like all of these things where you basically would enroll people, and you'd be trying to like get them healthier, and that would have a positive impact, and it would also make people feel like they weren't helpless against what was happening. But none of that. So I'm just saying, like, we haven't really seen, I think, good messaging since, I would say, the last like really good government messaging was probably during the space shuttle, the early days of the space shuttle program. Like, what was it, the 1980 launch, the first successful launch. Everybody was tuned into TV, and that was extensively covered by the media, and things that we would be able to develop in low gravity or no gravity, and experiments that could be done, and we had things that came out of that, right? That, like, cordless drills came out of the space program because you couldn't plug it in an outlet and run an extension cord outside of the craft while you're working. So there were tangible things. I mean, and it was in kind of real time step with the populace, and people were behind that, and it was televised. And I think that was kind of the end of it. And when the Soviet Union fell, in the mid 80s, or kind of later 80s, but then we kind of lost that, the antagonist, right? Which was always the Soviet Union. It was gone. And then I just think messaging just went by the wayside. I don't know. It's really strange, but I don't think we've had good propaganda, good public messaging, since the 80s. So let's go over. Vanessa is saying, making a statement, more power plants and infrastructure must be built now. Yes. And now is like now, because these data centers will be complete in 24 to 48 months and they'll be online. And how long does it take to build power plants? And not only that, right, but to build the lines that carry the electricity. I mean, look at Hoover Dam, and the dam was one thing, right? But then you had to build this entire massive grid structure to deliver the energy. So there are two components to that. And then Vanessa has also made a statement: when the data centers buy up all the power, what will our power bills be like at our homes? Yeah, excellent question. A face validity question. You raise your hand at a city council meeting where they're talking about this. That is a perfect question. What do we do? So in school administration, and those are kind of the points that I wanted to make from face validity. So I don't think I have any others. So I just had kind of a closing statement here. Let me go back to schools. Please remind me if I don't do that. Face validity isn't about conspiracies. It's about asking why the story we're told doesn't match what we can observe. And with data centers, the contradictions are impossible to ignore. So I was talking to some school administrators. I teach aspiring school leaders and I stay in contact. I've taught, for 23 years. So there are a number of administrators out there that have had classes with me in the past. So I'll touch base on various issues to kind of stay up to date of, like, again, what's happening in your boots on the ground world with school administration. And one of the things that is a topic that's starting to rumble with school administrators, just in the last couple months, brand new. This topic never came up before, but the question was being asked, if we go to referendum and we're asking the community to support us to build a new high school, and the high school is going to be $100 million. And that is a probably typical price for a high school. So, let's say that they're going to referendum they want to build this high school. It's $100 million. So the administrators I've talked to, they said, Dave, the question right now is less of, will our community support this or not, right? That question has always existed. That's why you go to referendum. The question is, will we have people bid on this? Because data centers come in, and the data center isn't building a $100 million high school. They're building a $10 billion data center. And they don't have to deal with weird schedules of, like, okay, you can build this, but then, the site's only going to be available at certain times. If you're adding onto a high school, you got to dance around, like, when school's in session, when it's not. Like, they'll have, like, carte blanche. The other thing is, they're getting massive amounts of money for materials and for labor. So there are only so many big companies across the state, right? And I guess there could be other states, but everyone's kind of facing this issue. So let's just say the state. There are only so many big companies that are able to build a $100 million high school. So this won't be companies that are building homes that will be impacted necessarily, although, like, they probably would be, because some of their employees would go and work on data centers because it's probably going to be more lucrative. They're going to get more money. But so anyway, what if you have this referendum and you only have like one bidder or two, and you used to have five, and they are telling you, we have to pay more. You're gonna be paying us more on this high school because we have to pay our workers more just to retain them, because they'll go and work for the data center. And also, it's going to be harder for us to get these materials like ducting and concrete and all of this, because the data center is needing this. And the data center has super deep pockets where your $100 million referendum has to stay within that $100 million. So basically, the school leaders and school boards are starting to ask the question of if we put this out there, these larger capital projects, are we going to get the normal amount of bidders that we do on these? Or are the bidders going to be consumed by the data centers? They're going to suck up their resources and their billers. Again, I went back to this. I had the statement earlier. I'll go back to again. Last year, we had $125 billion of construction in the state of Wisconsin, residential and business, right? 125 billion. That is the same amount that is being spent on data centers next year. So where do you get the workers? Where do you get the concrete trucks, the excavators? Like, these things are finite, and there's, it's not like companies can just create these levels of equipment and things like that for you. Like, they're not going to come up with a brand new cement plant and you can't put in an order for a crane, and 30 days later it shows up, that's completely built. I mean, if we just look at like fire trucks and garbage trucks, when municipalities order a fire truck, even a pumper, it's about 3 years from the time they order it until they get it delivered. In our community, we just had a ladder truck is about 3 years, and that's getting longer. It's the same. They're very similar with like garbage trucks, and it's like street sweepers and things. And it's because there's just more competition, and also government contracts have come in and bought a lot of the materials. Like Oshkosh company is building for military machinery that's going overseas, right? So you only have so many workers and the ability to scale so much on this stuff. And this isn't like wartime where you can scale and be, producing how many B-52 bombers or Liberty ships or something like that. So I think there's going to be this really weird impact on all of these all these municipality and these public projects, because I don't think they're going to be able to find the companies to build them, or they're going to have to make sacrifices. It's going to be much more expensive. And if you're a laborer in an area where a data center is being built, and I don't know what a data center is paying, but let's say the data center is very motivated, right, to get the data center built. Maybe they're going to pay $200 an hour for laborers to do this. I mean, it's a one-time kind of sunken cost because then it's there. But if they do that and someone, is working on a construction team the last 10, 15 years building a house, they'll look at that and say, see you later. Like, I'm gone. I'm going over here. So a lot of these questions, these face validity things, like, where do you get the equipment to build all these things? Where do you get the workforce to do that? And then there's only so much cable, there's only so many chips being built. What aren't these chips going into? Like, I remember it was 4 years ago, we took delivery of our SUV, and when we had ordered the package, it came in and it had all of the things that we had wanted in it, the heated seats and the heads-up display and some other things. But the ones that came after us, they didn't have those. Even if people ordered it, they would say the chips aren't available for this. So we will call you and you'll come back to the dealership when the chips are available, and the dealership will then take your vehicle apart and install these things. And that was a big thing, like back in 2022, 2023, and now I guess it's kind of caught up. But I mean, there was a period of time where there was that shortage because those chips are being prioritized into, I guess what would be early kind of AI proliferation. So yeah, a lot of very keen, input today. Thank you, Vanessa and Bolo. And I think, the questions that I brought up, the face validity questions, are really spot on. And I will just leave this by saying, I'm not taking a position for or against. I'm just stating from the whole face validity aspect, there are several areas where what's happening right now, just specific to data centers, is out of step with what we would expect for face validity, meaning it doesn't make sense. The big money up front, how fast these things are going in, the lack of community input, like what are we going to do with these things afterwards? what what is the purpose of these? The messaging is out of step with that. So yeah, I mean, I would be absolutely flabbergasted if there was ever a commercial on TV about data centers, just like buy data centers, like an informational of just a proponent of or like even a billboard or something like that, some advertising. Because I mean, that's another thing. I mean, it's been proven if you message enough, there'll be a certain part of the population which will accept the message or will normalize to the message. And as I've just shared here, like if you just took the medical angle, I think you'd get a lot of people behind you. And even if you took a military angle on this, I still think a lot of people would be like, okay, I get it. Do what you got to do, you know? And strange, right? It just is. I think that's the word to describe it, is strange. So I'll close with a little kind of thought experiment I did. And that was, I was out walking, I don't know, maybe a week ago or so. And I was thinking, what would I do if I was if I was a city alderperson? I did run for city alderperson, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years ago, and I didn't win. But at that time, I had to become familiar with what kind of the topics were in the city. One was like expanding housing, and then also they had to make a decision on whether they keep the airport open. It's not very big, and it's kind of it is landlocked, and just typical city operating, things that you had to brush up on and have a functional knowledge, because you'd be at the library and there'd be like 30, 40 people in the audience, and the people who are running, they would ask them questions like, what would you do on this? What's your position on this? So I imagined, let's say I was an alder person and our community was approached, the community I live in right now, which is on the Wisconsin River. So there's plenty of water, and it's sandy soil. So you're not having to drill through bedrock to get to water also. But what if a data center, a company approached the city, gave a proposal and said, hey, we'll give you, $8 billion. And this land right over here, this 500 acres, we've purchased this land, and we want it annexed to the city, or else, it's in the city or whatever. And here's the proposal, and we need you to sign off and approve this proposal, maybe city, county, but let's say it's a city. What would I do? And of course they're meeting with the city council, and it's not open, to the public. It's a private, meeting initially. And they're saying, here's the proposal. You have 30 days to make your decision on it. And if you don't accept it, we will take it to the next community. And boom, and that's it. So then what would I do personally as an older person? So let's say we did have a community input session and 500 people show up. And let's say 85% of them are against the data center. They're concerned about water, utilities, noise, how it might disrupt our wetlands and the environment. Just all those things are coming up. 85% of the people, more than 400 people, voice opposition. 15% are in support. And you'd have to vet that, right? To make sure people were actually in your community. It's not someone who's being bought to come in and say, oh, I think I'm going to move here. So what would I do? And I thought about it, and I'd be like, I'd vote for the data center. I would approve it, because the money that would come in for the community, first of all, if we don't do it, it's going to go to the next community. So really having it not in your area isn't a thing. It's still going to impact your area. It's going to be 8 miles away, but really it's in your area. But how do we turn down that amount of money again when it is like there's one fire truck in our community the fire chief was talking about, and he said, we only take this truck in town. It's like 35 years old, and they take great care of their equipment, but steering's kind of going a little wonky on it, and we don't take this out on like highway because this truck is up for replacement, but we can only replace one truck every 5 years. And then if you go through the streets and there's a new sewage plant that's needed because the city is expanding, and it's the third oldest city in Wisconsin. And you could just look and say, if we approve this, the money coming in takes care of all of these things right now. And I would approve it. I might be voted right out of office. It might be something I regret, but I would approve it. And it is weird because I don't think I would say, well, you can just walk, right? Like if you don't give appropriate public input for this, just go to the next community over, because that's detrimental to my community, because, we need these things and our taxes are already high. And if we had some relief that we are able to give and kind of reset, at least for the next 5 years. So it is a really weird position. And and this is how it typically goes with these municipalities. So the input sessions, people who are there will say most people were in opposition of it, yet the committee voted to support it. And you can understand why. It's not like I'm getting a kickback from the data center. It's not like they're saying, oh, and you're going to be on our board and we're going to give you $200,000 a year and something. It would have nothing to do with that, right? It would just be, if I'm really looking out for the best interest of my community, and looking at the needs of, again, ambulance service and fire and roads and property tax relief to make it affordable for people to stay here, and then money coming in maybe also to the schools to support what they're doing and those type of things, I would vote for it. So, well, everybody, I have enjoyed having this discussion. I put these notes together recently kind of just for my own thought process, because hearing more and more about not only hearing more about data centers, but actually driving past data centers that are being built, has really kind of sparked my line of inquiry, my thoughts, my questions on this. And things seem really disconnected from a face validity standpoint. I hope things work out. I really do. But I also it feels like we are just going light speed. And it seems also like there gets to be a certain threshold of money that once people can put forward so much money, the regulations and the questions and the stuff like that just kind of vanish. The money takes over. And that is also pretty scary. So, but it is going to be, I think, in the 50s the next couple days, which is unusual here in southern Wisconsin. Then we get back into 30s, which is more typical for this time of year. It will shorten up my winter a little bit. I'm not a big fan of winter in Wisconsin. I'm not an outdoorsy skiing, snowshoeing type person. So I kind of just endure winter and am happy when it's over, which is usually about the first week of April. You can start to get that sense that winter is behind you. But yeah, so we've got that coming up. I was raised in northern Wisconsin, and there it would get, colder and snowier about 2 weeks earlier than where I live now in southern Wisconsin. So by moving like 200 miles south, I've gained about 2 more weeks of spring and 2 more weeks of fall. But yeah, I'm going to enjoy the next couple days and then see where things go. But hard to believe we are 5 weeks away from Christmas. I am it's crazy. We're almost a month away from, what was it? 3 weeks ago was Halloween. So we're already 3 weeks ago. We had a really fun Halloween this year. Weather was great. A lot of kids, parents, just a fun time. But yeah, things just seem to be moving really fast right now. So, well, everybody, I'm wishing you well. I hope that you appreciated this episode of the Safety Doc. Again, we're not numbering these anymore, but we were talking about data centers today. So if you go back and give this a listen, and then also think about the concept of face validity, and think about that snowstorm and shivering outside, and the thermometer reading 80 degrees and not making sense. Think about member check networks, where if you have like 5 people, and preferably like not in your immediate geographic area, but 5 people that you can say, hey, what does it look like for you for data centers, as far as like messaging on the news or community meetings, or if you go out, are these being put near water sources? How big are the communities, the population of where these are being put in, to kind of see if it's unique to where you're at, or is this really something that is happening kind of at a consistent level across geographic regions. And what are you hearing for messaging or not hearing for messaging? So kind of applying some of those techniques. Well, everybody, this is your good friend, the Safety Doc, wishing you well. Let me see if I've got anything to take us out here. I have StreamYard, which is pretty phenomenal. And I am just not, I am not up to speed with all of its really fascinating features. So I need to spend some more time with it. So I have to be a little bit careful on what I use for an outro, because some of the music that I purchased when I had my subscription to Storyblocks, I think, gets tagged as being that someone else owns it, right? And then you get a copyright strike, and then you have to go in and then you have to either demonetize the show, or you have to cut out sections of that. So that's kind of a bad thing. So I try not to do that. Although, like, I had paid for all of that, and you're supposed to have this lifetime access, but then you have to file appeals, and not really worth it. So let me go in and just get a little part of me at the end here on my first book, which was School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America. Here's a minute and 11 seconds of me in the studio narrating that book. That is out there, an audiobook narrated by me, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America. All right, everybody. Describe the odor. Is it like when something electrical is burning? And so on. Ridiculous, right? We don't shift the investigation to the reporter. But that's covertly what the school district thought needed to happen to prevent their investigation scrambling principals from burning out. And as this paragraph smolders, it would be prudent to consider bringing students with disabilities from the sidelines of safety and center them to active roles of detecting and reporting threats. So we had a rather difficult meeting. Upon due diligence of examining the reporting system, I informed the district representative that I could not justify modifications to the existing model, as such changes would make the system less accessible to students. Well, that was a short chit-chat. The district folks believed, or hoped, that the threat input system could be modified and maintained with fidelity. I wasn't in alignment with that hypothesis, and so I was thanked and given notice that our partnership would be over at month's end. Business is business, but in school safety, it's never as simple as that.